You're watching CTOM TV. Knowledge is power.
So the big question here that I think is important is an indication for treatment.
Okay.
So the general consensus that you hear a lot, and I think this is just terrible information, is they say, well, if you're within a certain age group, then, there's no point getting it. Or if you've had a previous infection with an HPV, strain. But once again, there's over 200 different strains.
Right.
So just because you've been vaccinated against one strain does not mean you're going to be vaccinated against the other strains.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you've got 5 different strains in your body, it's still of value to get one of these vaccines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It won't protect you against the strains you already have because you've already developed antibodies for those, but it will continue to provide you protection against the other strains. And as you become more infected with different strains of HPV or other viruses, you open yourself up to sensitivity of reinfection with different subtypes and different strains. And that's not just with HPV, that's with many different strains.
Right.
So having HIV, for example, or hepatitis or even herpes can definitely increase your sensitivity to getting infection with HPV strains. It's just a matter of exposure.
So at any age, there's value to having this vaccine. Not
everyone
just
should get.
Because
everyone should get these vaccines.
Initially, I know years ago when it came out, there was this. It's just for teenage girls who have not yet been sexually active, and then
and I'll get into that.
Okay.
Right now, because I think that's an important part of the equation that has led to this misleading information that only certain people should have it.
All right, let's talk about
that. And those studies were focused on cervical cancer. These guidelines are based on cervical cancer. They're not based on all of the different cancers that HPVs
like you
cause.
mentioned the throat and the larynx.
Exactly. So these HPV vaccines will radically change how many people get these cancers. And
not just the cervical.
Deadly cancers, not just cervical. So most of the data has been in cervical and on strains 16 and 18. And I think that is the problem with the guidelines right now.
They're outdated.
They're totally outdated. And the people obviously who are doing this are not virologists, or they don't have enough knowledge on the HPV or the oncogenic functions of HPV. And so I think that's really important. I think every man, woman, and children should get whatever vaccines are available and should get the 9-valent vaccines if possible.
Okay.
It's going to radically change how many people get cancer.
All right. So regardless of your age or gender.
Yes. And so the age issue is kind of important because HPV only affects certain cells in the body. So it's not going to affect every cell in the body. Sure, you may see a plantar's wart on your hand and so on. And there are 2 different areas that they target. But specifically the ones that we're interested in right now, the oncogenic variants, they typically only target something called the parabasal or the basal cell. And this is a region of cells, mostly undifferentiated cells, under the epidermis of the skin. So the epidermis is the upper layer, and these are kind of in the basement membrane area. And this is, as you know, you've probably heard the term before, stem cell niche. So this is a stem cell niche area of the skin.
Okay.
And so in the cervix of young women, when they're just starting puberty, what happens is that basement area or that basal cell area can lose the upper epithelial layer, and therefore there's access of these HPV viruses to that layer now. So they have increased access to that layer. And that happens to women.
Sensitive.
Yeah, so it happens in an area called the transformational zone. And that's where a lot of these basal stem cells are located.
Okay.
So it's a mechanical thing. During puberty, there's more access to this transformational zone
Okay.
for the HPV. It's easier for it to infect these cells.
Okay.
During puberty, also happens during pregnancy, and it also happens during contraceptive use too. So it kind of opens up this area to
Gosh.
infection.
Wow, no doubt. During
And
those
so
very key reproductive
important.
times.
Yeah. And so this is where, and also there's another process that involves the movement of the stem cells during puberty in young women, where they move from a protected area down to the cervix. So all of a sudden you get this, this double whammy of a movement of stem cells to a different area during puberty, and also access. They're not as well protected. So the HPV infection that could be dormant has a much better chance of infecting these stem cells. And once again, it only affects these stem cells. So that's the important thing to note. Now, also abrasions. So, you can, we do see this in women that have sex at an early age, prior to puberty.
Prior to puberty?
Yeah.
So are we talking, we're talking about people who are sexually
Sexually
assaulted?
abused, yeah. They have a much higher increased risk for HPV infection.
Oh.
What can happen is the abrasion removes that top layer of epithelial cells and leaves that those basal cells exposed. So once again, they have HPV can have access to them. Yeah.
That's sad.
But that is a common mechanism. So that's also a mechanism in other areas of the body, is this increased access to this basal area of undifferentiated stem cells.
Which happens for young women at some very pivotal moments.
In their cervix, but it can also happen in other areas of the body.
Got it. Okay. Wow. Okay. So hence we come back to, yes, of course, get the vaccine, because there's so many factors that can influence whether you're going to be infected with any one of these strains.
And we don't know all of the oncogenic strains.
As you say, there's still lots to be
16
discovered.
right now.
Of 200 potential.
Right.
Thank you for watching Ketome TV. Subscribe below and stay informed.